I'm John Lordan, and I've been looking into mysterious occurrences since 2015. Joining me today are some friends from Uncovered.com.
I'm Andrea Cipriano, a forensic psychologist and the digital content specialist at Uncovered.
I'm Dana Pohl. I'm a librarian, podcaster, and head of community at Uncovered.
Welcome back to LordanArts Uncovered. And today, we'll be looking into the 1981 suspicious death of Kurt Sova. Kurt was a 17-year-old teenager in Newburgh Heights, Ohio, who was determined to go far in life with his three brothers at his side. But after a particularly rowdy Halloween party, Kurt vanished. His body was discovered a few days later in a nearby location that his family had actually searched a day earlier and found nothing. While locals were still grappling with Kurt's untimely death, another boy would be found dead in similar circumstances. As if this situation couldn't get any worse, some members of the Newburgh Heights Police Department were operating in less than ethical ways at the time. What was going on in Newburgh Heights in 1981? Current detectives and online sleuths are still trying to figure out the truth. Let's turn it over to our case experts to learn more. Andrea, Dana, what can you tell us about Kurt and how does this timeline come together?
Kurt Sova didn't have an easy upbringing. Kevin, one of Kurt's brothers and greatest advocate, has told the media that the family had to grow up fast because of financial struggles and racial tensions in their Ohio suburb. Kurt's parents, Dorothy and Ken, had 4 boys in 5 years. The order went Kenny, Keith, Kevin, and Kurt.
Through the dark times, Kurt was the shining light and the comedian that kept everybody together. I had the pleasure of meeting with Kevin back in 2020, and he described Kurt as a very outgoing and artistic kid who loved to draw and play football. He said Kurt was kind of like a chameleon and that he was able to fit into each different surroundings and always be the person that you needed in that moment. Here's more about Kurt in Kevin's own words from one of our phone calls.
He's just a happy kid. I mean, you come home, and it's just the day, and you just walk in. You still walk around squeaking like a mouse. We used to call him Mousy. And he would just walk around. Eek, 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 eek. And no matter how bad you were, you'd look at that and you go, "You're a little shit." Like, really? And it would have been fun to grow up with him.
I love that Mousy storyline, and it's amazing to me the stories that come through for families that have lost loved ones like that, and the way they share them. Also, very clear that you can hear his heartbreak at the end of that clip.
Kevin has also shared that when the older boys were in middle school, the Ohio suburb they lived in started to change. People who had money moved out, leaving behind a rougher crowd. Kevin said the brothers learned early on to take care of themselves and one another. They had to protect Kurt the most because he was the youngest. Eventually, the Sova family got to a point where the neighborhood was so bad they couldn't sell the house. Unfortunately, just as Kurt was in elementary school, tragedy struck. The Sova family was visiting their grandparents when someone broke into their house, set it on fire, and nearly everything they had burned to the ground.
And after that, the family moved to Newburgh Heights, and the house fire tragedy started to seem kind of like a blessing in disguise. Kevin had shared that the family was less fearful, the crime rate in their new area was much less, and the boys all easily made new friends. Kevin told Oxygen that life was beginning to get good again. The boys and their parents would often go camping, and they loved to hunt with their dad. Kevin shared with me that it was around this time, as a middle schooler, Kurt would spend his free time out on the family farm just outside of town, riding horses, playing with the pigs and the chickens.
Once in high school, Kurt began to grow into a young adult. His two buddies, John Miller and Danny Washington, lived within walking distance. The Sova family called the friend group the Three Musketeers because they were always together. When Kurt was 17, he'd occasionally have a beer or smoke a joint with his brothers. But Kevin said none of that was ever really Kurt's thing. The youngest Sova boy was happier getting good grades in school and being outdoors. He really enjoyed fishing with Danny and John.
So this brings us to Friday, October 23rd of 1981, and the beginning of this case's timeline. In the morning, Kurt skipped school and caught up with a good friend, Sam Corral. The rest of the day was uneventful until later on that night. Both Sam and Kurt went to a Halloween party less than a mile away from Kurt's house. It was still on the other side of town, though. Kurt wore a bright yellow t-shirt and his signature jean jacket, along with regular jean pants and tennis shoes. The party was at a duplex that was shared by siblings Debbie and Clayton Sams and another female roommate named Missy.
All right, let's just take a quick look at the map. I just want to kind of understand the area, get a little lay of the land here. So we have the Sova family living up in this area, Beta Avenue and East 41st Street, right? And the party that's taking place is at a duplex that's down at this corner, East 27th and Harvard Avenue. This right around here. Pretty close, like even by car, which I'm sure they probably just walked it. It's just over half a mile. And if they walked it, you could probably take some of these back ways. Now, keep in mind, we're talking about 1981. This is a satellite view from 2023. So the area might be a bit different. I would think these housing tracts were probably already in place. We know that this storage building was already there in place. I'm not 100% sure about anything going on back here. There's a recycling center there now. I don't know if that was there back in the 80s. But yeah, it's interesting. Just hearing the description, I was kind of thinking more rural, like, he likes to be out with the chickens and stuff. And this is more suburban, at least with how it looks now.
Definitely.
Yeah. So what do we know about this party?
We know that everyone at the party was older than Kurt and Sam, old enough to buy alcohol, while Kurt and Sam were still in high school. We also know from information shared later that the crowd at the duplex had drugs, and Kurt was drinking 190 proof Everclear.
Oh, well, for any of you at home that don't know much about Everclear, even the manufacturer who makes it, Luxco, recommend that you don't drink it directly. They suggest mixing it with water or other ingredients to dilute the strength. That's how powerful this stuff is. Everclear is a grain alcohol that's incredibly strong. To give you some perspective, ordinary vodka, gin, rum, and tequila, they have an alcohol concentration typically around 40% alcohol by volume, which is 80 proof. So at Everclear's 190 proof, that means that it's essentially 95% alcohol by volume. It's literally the world's strongest alcohol, and it really isn't intended to be consumed directly. At the height of its popularity, Everclear was used more as a household food-grade disinfectant or even as fuel for stoves. Nowadays, it's most commonly used as an ingredient in making other liquors. So we also have Kurt very young. I mean, he's still only 17 at this time, and he might not be aware about how dangerous drinking this stuff directly could be, or even what his tolerances are just for standard types of alcohol.
Exactly. And, the Sova family thinks that's definitely the case here, that Kurt didn't really know what his tolerance was. So we know that over the course of the night's party, Kurt was seen stumbling around, knocking into things, and getting so sick towards the end of the night that Sam actually had to take him outside for fresh air. At this time, both guys only had their t-shirts on, despite the fact that at 9:30, the temperature was around 50 degrees. So while Kurt was still hanging outside on the chain link fence, Sam ran back upstairs to get Kurt his jean jacket.
Now, Sam was drinking this night too, and he later told police that he was only upstairs for a few minutes. But we really don't have any way of knowing exactly what a few minutes was. It could have been 2 minutes, it could have been 20 minutes. Nevertheless, what we do know is by the time Sam went back outside with the jean jacket, Kurt was gone.
Yeah. And, even if we assume that he was out there alone for 10 minutes, it sounds like in the condition he was in, he wasn't going to be going far. So just taking a look, let's hit the map again real quick. I just want to get a sense of where he possibly could have been headed to. He's so close to home. Like, I look into a lot of cases where we have young men that drink too much and they separate from their party. And in many of those cases, it seems like they're trying to get back. They're trying to find their way home. What's strange here is there's Harvard Avenue is kind of the main street that he probably took to even get there. So if he does decide to go home, I would think that's where he's going to wrap, that he's going to go out to Harvard. I don't know if he would kind of do what these driving directions are showing, because that's overshooting his block a little bit. He might cut up one of these roads. This isn't actually a road right next to the warehouse here. This is like a driveway, essentially. But he might know about that. He might know about that driveway, cut up that. If this recycling center isn't here, if this is just woods, maybe he'd cut across the woods to get back to where his house was. But yeah, it's not, thinking about a missing persons investigation, knowing that he's going to become missing, my immediate focus is on, we've got this little cluster of large backyards or trees here. I'm not even sure if all of these are tied to properties. It doesn't quite look like it. It looks almost like a green belt right in the middle of it. I'd be thinking, looking there right off the bat, and there is a park back here, Kathy Edwards Park. I don't know if it was different back then. There's also what looks like a quarry back here now. I don't know if this might have been different around that time, but for spaces, typical missing person investigation, yeah, we've got a substation over here. We've got storage. There's a lot of places that you would look, but pretty immediately I'd be thinking, especially under the condition of, oh, he had too much to drink. He's trying to get away. He's embarrassed, or he wants to get comfortable, wants to be alone, wants to get back home. I'd be very concerned about these kind of woods, all these trees.
And I could definitely see a world in which, like you're saying, it's possible this is Kurt's, like, one of his first times really drinking the way he did. And even if it's not embarrassment, it could be his own fear of, like, I just want to go home to my older brothers. They know, like, I can hang out with them and feel safe with them and ride this out, essentially.
Yeah.
So I definitely see that.
Although I can also say, especially when I was young, I had times where you can feel like it's the end of the world also. Like you can, especially in the condition he was in, he probably was not feeling good. He might be thinking, I'm poisoned. Like, I need to get somewhere.
And not to mention the fact that, he's not feeling well. And also, how clear is he thinking? So I always, this is, the kinds of decisions we make when we've had too much to drink are not always good or logical. So I want to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So what did Sam do once he realized that Kurt wasn't outside anymore, or in the spot he left him?
Yeah, pretty quickly he realized that he needed to go looking. So he took a quick walk around the nearby streets and he searched a parking lot, which is one that we just all looked at, connected to the J.L. Goodman Furniture Incorporated warehouse. But after Sam had no luck finding Kurt, he just went back to the party. He essentially rationalized that Kurt started to walk home, pretty much what we just talked about also. And his official statement to the police was that he could only guess that someone who knew Kurt picked him up because everything happened so fast. So he really believes that someone picked Kurt up in a car.
The next morning, Saturday the 24th, the Sova family wasn't initially alarmed that Kurt wasn't home. But they knew something was wrong when they spoke to the other three musketeers, John and Danny, and realized they had no idea where Kurt was. The family, along with Kurt's older brothers, started to search around town to see if they could find him. They talked with anyone they passed on the street and searched ravines, alleyways, and dumpsters, but found no sign of Kurt.
So when Sunday morning rolled around, the Sova family contacted the Newburgh Heights Police Department and registered him as a missing person. So then the family search escalated. By late morning, Dorothy, Kurt's mom, began handing out flyers around town. And it's also on Sunday that Dorothy gets her first lead when a neighbor informs her about the party that Kurt was at that Friday night.
It's interesting that you're saying Dorothy gets her first lead, and we're not talking about law enforcement here. Were the police actually investigating this?
So it's a little unclear how involved the Newburgh Heights police were in the early days of this investigation. As Kevin put it, his mother had an investigative nature, and she was not waiting for a person with a badge to catch up to her.
Okay.
And that's a really good thing. Dorothy learned about the Friday night party, got the address from a neighbor, and headed over to the duplex house. I'm sure Dorothy had a lot of hope and thought she was going to find Kurt still hanging out. But when she got there, the apparent party hosts weren't home. Someone else answered the door and denied a party ever happened. But they gave Dorothy the phone number for Debbie Sams, the resident and the girl who hosted the party. When Dorothy got on the phone with Debbie, Debbie was confrontational and denied that a party ever happened.
But Dorothy didn't give up, and she didn't stop there. She got word that pizza was delivered to the party at some point. So she ended up tracking down and speaking to the pizza delivery driver, who confirmed that a party did take place. So once Dorothy had that information, she called Debbie for the second time, and Debbie finally caved and admitted that she did in fact have a party, but she denied knowing anything about what would have happened to Kurt.
All right. I just want to say I'm now officially on board with the Dorothy is a detective statement that Kevin made, because that's pretty clever to figure out, oh, was there pizza delivered? Yes, there was. I'm going to find the actual driver. Oh, I went and talked to him. It gave her the piece that she needed to go back to Debbie and kind of push through this BS story of, no, there was no party that was there. Now, admittedly, it does sound like Debbie could be denying that the party ever happened because she knew that she had underage drinking going on there, and all of a sudden this could turn into a real problem for her on that front. But it could be that there was already a bigger problem. It could be that something happened to Kurt that she did know about. So she could be covering something up. It's hard to know when sometimes there's simple explanations about why people aren't honest, and sometimes they're more complex, but you don't know. All you know is just they lied. So why did they lie? What happens next?
That following Monday and Tuesday were the same for the Sova family. Both days, they go out with a team of volunteers, putting up new missing persons flyers and canvassing the area looking for Kurt. They had checked nearly every square inch of Newburgh Heights. While the family was out looking, the police were responding to a strange tip. On Monday, October 26th, Detective Robert Karras from the Newburgh Heights Police Department got a call from a store manager at the Slavic Village record shop in town. The manager said a homeless man came into the shop, saw Kurt's missing person flyer, and told him to take it down because they're going to find him in 2 days and they're not going to know what happened to him.
The manager was skeptical and honestly freaked out. But that next day, that Tuesday, the same homeless man left flowers and a note by the door. The note reportedly said, "Roses are red, the sky is blue. They found him dead, and they'll find you too." Police briefly questioned this man, who seemed to be a little mentally unstable at the time, but there was no evidence that he committed a crime, so he was released. Thankfully, Dorothy got a more solid lead, but it was honestly equally as strange.
On Wednesday, October 28th, Dorothy got a call at 3 a.m. from Debbie saying someone was sleeping in her basement and perhaps it was Kurt. At first, Dorothy was skeptical since the young girl had lied before, but the Sova family would have gone to the ends of the earth if that's what a tip said to do. Kurt's father, Ken, went to the house to investigate. He told Unsolved Mysteries that when he got to the basement, he expected to find Kurt sick or hurt, but he only found a cot that looked like someone had been sleeping in it. There was no sign of who it was or where they went.
Well, Debbie has now officially tilted my suspicion meter. I mean, this I've seen other instances where you occasionally have a suspect or a person of interest, and in a situation where someone is deceased, they'll try to create a scenario or some type of proof of life, like a proof of life type event. And there's always some hokiness to it. It's never believable. With this story, we're getting, I think someone's sleeping in my basement. Oh, and it might be Kurt, but I'm not exactly sure who it is. Like, hello, if you were contacted by a mother looking for her son and you heard someone sleeping in your basement, wouldn't you go check? Like, your first instinct is, oh, I'm going to get on the phone. It just, it doesn't seem believable on its face. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. And, if that was the plan, to trick them into thinking that Kurt was alive that day, her plan would later fall apart that Wednesday evening. So the Sova family's worst nightmares were realized when Kurt's body was found in a ravine near the JL Furniture Warehouse, which is only 500 yards from the party house. A group of kids who were cutting through the lot discovered Kurt's body. And so this is the same location that Sam searched for Kurt on the night of the party. And it's the same location where Kurt's father, Ken, searched just 24 hours earlier. So to our knowledge, the ravine is a wide open space with nothing obstructing someone's view. And you'd think if there was a body of a young teenager wearing a bright yellow shirt, that Kurt's family definitely would have seen him.
And Kurt's body was apparently positioned lying in a puddle with his arms spread wide and his legs straight out with his feet crossed. Kurt was missing both shoes. One was later found stuck between two rocks away from his body. His right foot had a sock on it. His left didn't. We're saying apparently when describing how Kurt's body was found because we still don't know for certain how he was found. The detectives arriving on the scene never documented his positioning.
Wait, I thought the Unsolved Mysteries episode sure showed a reenactment and, like full-on crime scene analysis, out taking pictures and all that stuff. Did none of that stuff actually happen?
Yeah, it didn't actually happen. The only Polaroid pictures that were taken that day were of the missing shoe and Kurt's body on the stretcher being loaded into the ambulance. So because we don't know the exact position of his body, it's difficult to know if he was placed there or if he died there naturally.
That is so crazy. Yeah, so let's take another look at the map here. So this is the location. What is now Big Fig Mattress, it looks like, is the storage facility from before. One thing I'm noticing about it is it's pretty much like if you're looking for the most direct route from where he was at the party back to his home, he's found on that path. It's really interesting to hear that this path was searched, because I would assume it should be searched. I mean, just basics of, hey, look at a map. Where could he have gone? Okay, his intent was probably that he was heading home. Like, that's, I mean, it's right between the two spots. Like, it's a bullseye here. So either it was searched and he wasn't there at the time, which I guess is a possibility, or it was searched and they missed him somehow. But to your point, he's wearing a yellow shirt. He's out in the middle of the ground. This is a really, really tough case, especially with this lacking information.
And I mean, again, like the information that we have is super scarce. And, his body positioning, I've seen it described online as almost like a T, or that some people described it as him being almost like on a cross because his legs were crossed a little, his feet were crossed over one another.
Yeah.
So
you guys have a picture here from the Unsolved Mysteries up over on uncovered.com, and you can see, they're kind of depicting it as, him lying face up. Oh, that's interesting. I originally was assumed that he was face down in the puddle, which, we hear of a lot of cases where guys have too much to drink and they wind up in water sources, but interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, the body positioning to me, I think, is the one thing that I get stuck on and kind of have some thoughts about it a little bit, especially the fact of him being shoeless. So if we take what Debbie was saying to be true of, let's just say Kurt was staying in the basement, and then maybe he did get sick and he did die on the property. If the siblings and then the other roommate freaked out of they have a younger kid, 17-year-old kid who was drinking, die on their property and they don't want to be held responsible, I could see a world in which they would essentially like drag his body to a location where he would be found later. And so my thinking with him being shoeless is that if someone was dragging him by the arms and pulling him along that way, his shoes could have easily come off in that process. And then, I think specifically the idea that the one shoe was found wedged between two rocks, that they were pulling him along, the shoe got stuck, and they just had to keep yanking until the shoe came off so that they could move him to where they wanted him to be. To me, that's really the only way that I can explain that. Plus him missing a sock. I mean, it's hard to imagine that even if he's really drunk on Everclear and he's getting to this space by himself, why take your shoes off? Why take a sock off?
Well, and if
it just feels different.
Yeah, if your foot gets caught in something, like you're going to free your foot so you can continue walking. Are you going to free your foot like leaving your shoe behind? I mean, I guess if you're really messed up, maybe you wouldn't think about it, but it just seems to me that, I imagine the front of my foot gets wedged under something. My instinct is immediately going to be to reverse the direction to pull it back out and then step over whatever. So I guess it's possible. It's hard to tell because we have this kind of X factor in terms of the alcohol and how that's impairing him. What does his mother think? I mean, now that there's a discovery, does she have a theory as to what happened?
Yeah, she definitely does. So she believes that Kurt died in the cot that was in the basement. And then, similarly, the people at the house panicked and just tried to get rid of him, or rid of his body, I should say. And she also believes that Debbie called her instead of the police because they wanted someone to find him, but they didn't want the cops to be the first ones to make the call.
Well, I also just have to say it's really weird. I don't know that I've ever looked at a case through this lens before. I mean, I've certainly talked to family members and had them present information, but in this case, it's almost like Dorothy has the best information. Like this is pretty unusual. And knowing there's not a lot of documentation on the death scene, are we going to get any solid official information here? Like, okay, we found the body, so now we get it to the coroner. Was there an autopsy?
So Kurt's body was taken to the coroner's office for an autopsy, and it was determined that he had died only 24 to 36 hours before his body was found, which meant that he would have to be alive for at least 3 days after the party. However, the chief deputy coroner, Dr. Lester Adelson, said that his BAC was 0.11, so he couldn't determine the exact cause of death, but he eventually told Unsolved Mysteries that the manner of death in this particular case was signed out to be as probably accidental. He said that Kurt wasn't beaten in any way, he wasn't traumatized, and that he didn't have enough alcohol in his system to actually end his life.
So, okay, the situation that I was concerned about, young man has too much to drink, winds up stumbling into a water source, drowns. Clearly isn't what's happening here because they're not saying drowning as cause of death. But we also have the social information of people talking about he was drinking Everclear, but his BAC is only coming back at 0.11. Now, admittedly, I think your blood alcohol content could probably change a little bit through decomposition, but we don't even have that excuse here because they're saying he only died 24 to 36 hours prior. So he was certainly somewhere missing for that time. Maybe Dorothy's theory about the cod is accurate. Maybe he was so sick that someone, I don't even want to pin it on one particular person, but someone in the house thought, we've got to get him back to health before we let him go or we're going to be in trouble. And things got worse and worse and worse. But if that's the case, then why isn't the autopsy showing that? Cause of death, severe malnutrition, like, some other reason for it. And if you don't have any of that, how do you rule it as probably accidental? Like, this is just mind-blowing.
What I think is super interesting with this too is the Ohio Attorney General website actually lists Kurt's case as a homicide. So they don't even have it, they don't even mention accident. They say it's a homicide.
Wow.
And beyond that, we also know that Kurt did have some bruising on his legs, but it's difficult to determine if those were from Kurt roughhousing with his friends or brothers in the days prior to the party, or if they were related to something that happened after the party. He played football as well, so being a little banged up wasn't uncommon for Kurt.
Cases of this nature are always tough, admittedly. But in this instance, we've got like no official evidence to go through, conflicting information from our official sources. We've got, coroner's office. No, it's accidental. No, not according to the Ohio Attorney General. Nope. According to them, it's homicide. I can't imagine how frustrating this must be for the family. So how does the investigation go? First of all, does it ever really get started? But are we going to get any solid details on this?
Yeah, I mean, those are good questions. So when the Cleveland Police Department, which is obviously a much bigger department with more funding, when they heard that the Newburgh Heights Police Department found a body, Cleveland asked them if they wanted assistance with the investigation. But the Newburgh Heights Police Department turned Cleveland away, saying that they didn't want any outside help. And we also know that when a Cleveland police detective looked into the case months after Kurt's body was found, that detective discovered that the case file was missing paperwork and it didn't document any evidence collected.
And what's even worse is that Detective Robert Karras didn't even step foot onto the property where the party took place, which could have very well have been a secondary crime scene. The basement was never investigated, which, if they were looking for DNA or Kurt's prints, could have helped detectives piece together the timeline of what happened over the 5 days Kurt was missing. The Sova family always thought from day one that the police did a poor job. And in the following years, they discovered that they were right to think that.
The Newburgh Heights Police Chief, James Lucas, was found guilty of falsifying documents for a police dispatcher, and he was later found to have a prior criminal record, including a conviction for willfully abandoning his duties as an officer of the law. And then about 10 years later, Detective Karras pled guilty to physically abusing and harassing young teenagers that he arrested. Karras was also found to be using drugs at the time of Kurt's death, meaning he could have been high while working on the case, obviously further corrupting the entire file.
Kurt's case is full of so many unanswered questions, like the strange homeless man's claims and the poem in the days leading up to when his body was found. But that's not all. There were a few other strange events that are worth noting.
Well, hold on a second. That's actually a really good point. And it really sticks out in terms of this whole story, thinking about this homeless man coming into the record store and saying this stuff. It sounds like a scene from like a 1980s mystery movie or something like that. Like, in comes the prophet telling you guys what's about to happen. But he's right. And it's strange to me that it seems like that's really not being considered very strongly in this case. You had someone that came in with information that actually turned out to be highly accurate. You're going to find him and not know how he died and not know what killed him. Like it's making me wonder if there was possibly some interaction between Kurt and law enforcement, and who would see that. If you had a homeless man that was, living in the woods nearby, maybe they witnessed enough of it to understand what happened there and then went and tried to relay that information to someone. Now, I'm not trying to tie this into some kind of big conspiracy or something. Who knows what happens when that information gets called in as a tip? Is that guy covering up for someone else on the police department? Probably not. I think he probably went and interviewed a homeless guy that looked like he was having some mental health issues and said, okay, hey, we can't lean on this. And not to mention, I think that interview happened before Kurt's body was actually found. So maybe they didn't realize the importance or the accuracy of the information that the homeless man had brought in. Yeah, it's crazy.
And I mean, like you said, anything is possible, really, especially with some of those key details being so strange. And of course, it's also easy to publicly dismiss information if it's coming from a source like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because now he's also muddied the water, right? Like he's come and talked to another member in the community about it. Someone that cared enough to actually, hey, I'm going to call in this information because that sounds weird. So now you've got a good Samaritan that's kind of involved in this. And if it is a cover up, you know, they're going to want to lay that information down somehow. Oh, it's just the crazy homeless guy. We can't pay any attention to that publicly. So what are the other strange points? I'm sorry, Dan, I took you off track there. What were the other strange points you were about to mention?
So current detectives say these claims might be unreliable or wholly unrelated. But first off, a friend of Kurt's named David Trusnick claimed that he saw Kurt 3 days after he disappeared. David says someone resembling Kurt was walking along a busy street less than a mile from the Sova home. According to David, a van pulled up alongside the person who looked like Kurt, and he yelled out, "Franco!" Then Kurt apparently got in the van. There are theories that Franco refers to Craig Franco, a young gas station attendant who was killed in December of the same year, but this is largely speculation.
Yeah, I'm always really leery of eyewitness accounts, especially if they don't really fit the conditions of the situation and kind of have that. It's almost like a ring of truth that comes to him. It's like, oh, he noticed something that's a piece of what we already know about on this side. This sounds like it's just kind of left field, and maybe he misidentified someone else.
Mm-hmm. And we know at that time too, like Kurt had a pretty popular haircut, looked, you know, like most young teenagers did at the time. So it's definitely possible he saw somebody else. But I mean, you know, as Dana said, this wasn't the only strange thing that happened. So the second strange theory surrounding Kurt's death is that on February 2nd of the following year, the body of 13-year-old Eugene Cavett, who lived on the same street as Kurt, was found in a ravine on the same street, just 2.5 miles from where Kurt's body was discovered. Both boys had been missing for a few days before they died, and Eugene's right shoe was also never found. So I know this sounds like a really big bomb to drop near the end of the episode, but Eugene's death was officially ruled an accident.
It's almost unfortunate that it wasn't connected in some way, because then at least maybe we would have had elements of a decent investigation related to another victim that could have helped inform this one. But oh man, I don't know. I don't know where I land with all this. Dana, what do you think? Where are you winding up with all this?
So I'm leaning towards the connection between the other case. I feel, the other young man's death, missing the shoe, both, I'm not 100% sure if that boy's body was found, had died the day he went missing, or if he was found later. But if he was found later, that's a true connection. If they believe that, he died days after he went missing, the shoe is the other piece of that. So it does make me, I'd be super interested in diving into that and learning more about that. I kind of am leaning that direction. I don't think that Kurt, walked away and ended up where he was found. I can see the possibility where he may have been in that basement. Maybe he did die, but it's weird that he died 3 days after he was initially sick. And so it's really kind of hard to wrap your head around a solid theory, but there are a lot of coincidences that I think need to be explored.
Yeah, I mean, there's other possibilities in terms of that time frame. Like, he crawls into someone's vehicle, passes out, the heat elements get to him. Or if we're going to run down the thought of law enforcement involvement of some kind, they stuff him in a trunk for a couple days. And then he expires and they take him out and they drop him at that location. I don't know. Andrea, I need more help. What do you think about this?
I need help too. I think it's one of those things where Kurt's case, especially with the lack of documentation, there are enough holes in it where we can start to fill it with some of the other things. And I think that's where the other theories about Franco and Eugene Cavett being possibly connected is we can kind of manipulate what we already know about Kurt's case to start to fit some of those other, those other theories.
Yeah.
Which is definitely where it's, where it's hardest. I think for me, the one thing that I look to most in this is definitely the last call that Debbie made, that there was someone in the basement. It hurts to know that the detective never went to go check out that basement as a potential secondary crime scene. We don't know if there's any evidence of cleaned up vomit or just anything like that that would prove someone was down there. That's the hardest for me, because essentially, based on what we know, it seems like Kurt vanished for a couple days, and not knowing where he could have been actually would change the direction of the case.
Yeah. I'm typically not looking to put together serial killer theories in terms of associating it with another case, and definitely a case that's been officially ruled an accident. Though I know a bunch of people out there would say, yeah, but I mean, yeah, I get it.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also the guy that has seen so many of these cases that have been called smiley face killer, pusher, like these kind of super killer theories. And when you look at the information from the CDC, if you look into the statistics on drownings of young men, how often alcohol is involved is significant. How many stories have we heard about the young guy that leaves the bar, separates from his group, and he winds up in a body of water? I was really expecting Kurt's story to kind of fit the conditions of that. He does wind up in a puddle, but based on what we know, it seems like he's face up. Is there I know there's so little official documentation. Do we know if that scene from Unsolved Mysteries is accurate, that he was actually face up in the puddle?
I believe they worked with one of the paramedics to help recreate that scene. Okay. So it's as close as possible, but still, to your question, puddle, we don't know how deep the puddle was. Like, maybe the puddle was much deeper when his body was there, and then you're looking at hours before the other kids found him. We just don't know.
Well, and you also have him being found. So the first responder might not be the first person that's actually interacting with him. You might have had someone that ran over, thought that he was in distress, maybe in an effort to try to save him, pulled him and twisted him around. That would actually explain why his feet were crossed. If someone went and pulled him, if he was laying face down and someone pulled on one arm and rolled him over, his feet might cross.
Right. But his cause of death has not been ruled a drowning. So that's the other kind of weird piece of the puzzle. Mm-hmm. What you're saying, John, I agree. Like, I'm not one to, kind of go off on this type of serial killer connecting cases easily. But in this case, I mean, even to the point where, how do we know if he was being held in the basement? Like, we don't know if maybe he was held in the basement for several days. And then he was, whatever happened to him, he was then, maybe, like you said, Andrea, dragged, to his position and just left there to be found. So, I think that and the other really disturbing piece of this is we have no evidence that the police searched for him. Like, we know that his family was searching day in and day out, but we have no evidence that the police were searching. And I think that's a big, glaring, kind of red flag in my mind that, why were they not conducting searches? You have a missing young man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and even if you aren't going to conduct searches when he's missing, all of a sudden a body turns up and you're not, just process the scene, get some photos, that's kind of unbelievable. So I know we've already mentioned it, but we've got a case seemingly not investigated very well. Dorothy being kind of the best investigator on this. What happens around this? How is this family affected by all this?
So Kurt's death tore the Sova family apart. Kevin says his parents were never the same, and his other brothers turned to addiction that quickly took their lives. Dorothy Sova told Unsolved Mysteries, "I don't think I'll ever come to peace with myself until I find my answers. And if I don't find out through this program, I'll keep on searching. I'll keep on searching until I'm buried myself." Dorothy passed away in 2014, leaving behind boxes of notes and documents from her own investigation. The detectives who are on the police force in Newburgh Heights today are diligently working on trying to solve this case using Dorothy's documents.
And it's her advocacy that inspired the new detectives to keep looking for answers. So as of October of 2021, the Newburgh Heights police have told Cleveland 19 News reporters that they've exhausted every lead that they have, and Kurt's case remains inactive. But that doesn't mean like Kevin has given up on answers. Here's a snippet of our phone conversation from back in 2020.
I just think that if anybody has the smallest amount of information, even if they don't think it's monumental, put that piece of the puzzle into the center of the table for us, and maybe the other pieces we have, plus somebody else's ideas or thoughts or information, could give us a resolution to Kurt Sova's death. We just want closure on it. That doesn't mean anybody's at fault for that. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But if they're not and they know what happened, at least close the timeline. Finish the story.
I think he says it all there. Finish the story. It's been 40 years since Kurt Sova mysteriously died following the Halloween party at the duplex. Just as Kevin said, even the smallest bit of information could help blow this case wide open. It's possible someone from the party knows more than they're letting on, and if they could come forward all these years later, they could be giving peace to a family that's still waiting and still looking for hope. Also, in the description box below, there's going to be a link to the Facebook page, the official Justice for Kurt Sova page, which is actually managed by the police department. Give them a like so that you show them that support and let them know that people still care.
And speaking of caring communities, if you're looking for a space to meet like-minded true crime enthusiasts and advocates while also engaging in case discussions, look no further than the Uncovered community.
We even have a space in the community completely dedicated to this series with John Lordan, where we discuss the cases we've covered in each episode. Regardless of whether you join our community or not, you still have access to the Uncovered database, where you can see all of our sources and a full timeline of Kurt's case. If you want to support the work we do, check out Uncovered's merch. You can find links in the description box below.
And of course, the biggest help is if you know something, say something. If you have any information on what happened to Kurt Sova, you can call or text the Newburgh Heights Police Department at 216-386-0024, or you can even email the address that you see on your screen right now. You can also submit an anonymous tip if you need to the Ohio Attorney General tip line. That's 855-BCI-OHIO, which translates to 855-224-6446. A very big thank you to Kevin Sova. And Kevin, if you're watching this, please know that our hearts go out to you as well. We know that you've been saddled with this for far too long. Also, thank you to Unsolved Mysteries, Cleveland 19, AP News, Fox 8, Cleveland.com, Mansfield News Journal, the Marion Star, WOIO TV, Dayton Daily News, the Trace Evidence Podcast, the Justice for Kurt Sova Facebook page, Web Sleuths, Reddit, and Wikipedia. Also, a very big thank you to my friends at Uncovered.com and co-hosts on today's show, Andrea Cipriano and Dana Pohl. Please join us again in 2 weeks as we look into yet another mystery that deserves to be uncovered.